do you see it like a benefit to teaching entrepreneurship or, some kind of skill set within a physics department?
I've seen it at a lot of places, and it generally has not worked well. So why is that?
Why are they? Why is there a negative attitude?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So my three biggest predictors for entrepreneurial success are grit, bias to action, and narrative, ability to kind of tell narrative. So grit is perseverance through failure, which many scientists actually do have, because most of the work you're doing is iterating, continuing to kind of develop even after something fails. Bias to action is a little different, where so much of depending on kind of what science we're talking about, you're doing careful planning. You don't get to do careful planning when you're building a startup or a growth stage business. You have to have a bias to act. I always tell people the absolute index of bias to action is the movie Groundhog Day. By the way, happy Groundhog Day.
Yeah, happy Groundhog Day.
Because so you get to basically live the same. If you could live the same day a million times in a day, you could make that day perfect. And that's what a startup is. You don't know what path is going to get you to the other side of the mountain, and you have to get over there before you run out of food and water. And so you've got to constantly be looking, realizing you're wrong, turning around, going back, realizing you're wrong, turning around, going back. The faster you can do that, the more of a bias you have to responding to what the environment or the market or your product development cycle is telling you, the more likely you are to succeed before you run out of capital or time. And then narrative. The person who indexes infinitely on narrative, so let me just say, each one of these three categories you can index infinitely on. If you index infinitely on grit, it means you will never give up. You're out of water, you're out of food, you're out of money, and you convince everyone to keep going not
300, the movie think of the movie 300. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the absolute. The absolute on bias to action is the movie Groundhog Day. And the absolute on narrative is a guy like Elon Musk who could show up, tell you he's going to do something and then not do it, and still get you to give him more money and do it over and over again for 10 years. And then finally he delivers a product. But the ability that he has and Steve Jobs had is this ability to storytell people about what's possible in the future. And the power of narrative is that you can attract employees to come and help you build, to get in that scrum with you on the rugby field. You can attract capital. Investors will keep giving you money, so you actually have more time to get there. And ability to attract customers, sell them on the vision and the dream of what you're building. And those three skill sets are independent skill sets and I'm not saying that there's no overlap. There can certainly be overlap with scientists that are working in academia. But I'm saying those are the skill sets that predict entrepreneurial success. And there's a real question on how much of that comes learned through behavior and experience, how much of it is innate, and how much of it can be taught. And that's where I think there's a challenge of let me just throw up an entrepreneurship school and teach people how to be entrepreneurs. I think that these things that are necessary for entrepreneurship, all the rest of it's tactical. It's textbook stuff. It's do this, write this plan, find your customer. There's a lot of people that help and support entrepreneurship and development. But without those three things or having a strong index on some set of those three things, I think, the probability of success is generally very low.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think these things are really hard to kind of find.
Yeah, they're hard to find. And then there's also the kind of, check your own kind of sunk cost fallacies and biases too, because everything you described, the systematic, behavior of someone like Elizabeth Holmes, right? I mean, good storyteller, lots of grit, hard worker, bias to action, influential customer seeking, and you couldn't get, like I said, a better story. And that brings me to my, I was going to ask you, kind of another frivolous question, but I'd like to know, kind of in terms of how you systematize. Ray Dalio is famous. He has a quote. A good entrepreneur, in his case, he's saying, should have many things that he systematizes or she systematizes very well. And I wanted to ask you, what things in your strategy, in your investment strategy, or the way your thought process is, do you strategize in the mold of that famous black turtleneck wearing entrepreneur inventor Elizabeth Holmes? So are there things, do you have like a routine? Right. Do you have a daily routine? Do you have, how are you monitoring things? How do you what do you systematize? And what's your rubric for systematization, if you will?
Of the work I do?
Yeah, the work you do. And also, I'd be interested in your personal, habits if you want to share them.
My challenge is probably one of orientation towards creativity. So I bias towards creativity. So if I'm not feeling like I'm endeavoring into a new space. Like I have almost like an interest or an addiction for new things, for a new space. Maybe there's this intellectual curiosity problem that drives me to do that, but it's coupled with this idea that I have to make stuff or enable the making of stuff too. And so that makes it hard to have, although someone did once tell me, who actually wrote a book on the psychology of creativity, that having a system for creativity can actually enable more creativity than having the absence, where a lot of people want to kind of have the absence of
having
creativity.
a framework, having a painting size, right? Those are constraints, the constraint model,
Yeah. So look, I mean, my world is fairly, if I were to kind of try and classify it, I've got companies that I'm an investor in or that I helped start that I'm an investor in. So I own stakes in companies that I'm involved in. And they have different need states, and they are very dynamic. And as their need states kind of increase, I need to spend more time with them. And that's why it's not as easy as just every week I check in with each one. Sometimes I don't need to spend time with them. Sometimes there's a crisis and I got to spend all week with one of them. And then the work I can help them do is either recruiting or raising capital or product and strategy and customer stuff. And so that's kind of spending time with companies. Then the other one is making sure that I have adequate capital to do the work I want to do. So, we raise capital from other investors, and we use that capital to support the work we're doing. And then the third is the most interesting, which is kind of exploration of new opportunities. And exploration of new opportunities is all about thesis development. So I tell people, like, our job is to connect the dots, where we spend time reading papers or meeting with scientists or academics or researchers or engineers. Then we separately spend time with interesting executives or entrepreneurs, and we separately spend time in the markets, understanding the markets, the businesses that are operating in these markets very deeply. And then if we can see a connection, like if you took this engineering capability and this scientific discovery and you put them together with this team, you could change that market in that way. And that's the kind of connections that we try and make, which is, what are we seeing the connections between that other people maybe aren't seeing? And that then forms the basis of a thesis. That thesis can then go be tested or invested against. And so we would then deploy capital into an existing team because they map to our thesis, and then they can go and kind of test it, or they're executing well against the thesis and we want to support them and fund them. Or we can help kind of build a team and start a company to go execute against that thesis. So that's kind of how I would classify how I spend my time.